Do love a good steak, but prefer to eat it in a restaurant because you never quite get that same taste when you try to cook it indoors at home. I'm the same way, and I do all the cooking for my family. Recently, I was diagnosed with celiac disease, which means I have a wheat allergy, and getting out to eat has been a little bit harder as I've been watching my wheat consumption more. And I'm very susceptible to cross-contamination. So what I've been doing is taking my favorite meals that I would get in a restaurant, and I'm learning how to do them at home. And I'm having good results at finding the same quality foods that you would normally have at a restaurant. So if you love a quality steak, but you're too afraid to spend the money on an expensive cut of meat, I'm hoping today that I can show you that it's really not that hard. There's just a few things that you need to know, and you're going to love this method, and I'm sure that you'll try it out at home yourself if you're a steak lover. So as we get going today, I'm going to be breaking this up into 4 different sections. The first, we're going to talk about the grade of steak and how USDA actually certifies those steaks. The second, we're going to talk about the thickness of the steak and what is the preferred thickness for the temperatures that we're going to be using today. Third, I'm going to teach you how to prep your steak. You can do it as little as an hour beforehand or up to 24 hours long. And then finally, we're going to talk about the method that we're using to make the steak. And it's going to be a little bit different than what you've probably seen before, where normally you have a cut of meat and you're going to brown it first on both sides and then maybe do it in slow temperature in the oven to get it where it needs to be temperature-wise. For this style, we're going to be using a ribeye cut, which is my favorite. And we're going to actually put it in the oven first and then brown that cut of meat. And hopefully, if we've done it right, we're going to get a nice brown, crispy outside that's going to lock in all the flavor and juices of your ribeye steak. So cooking a ribeye steak indoors, it's super easy, like I said, and the USDA has 3 different grades for the ribeye or for a steak. It's all going to have to do with the marbling of the steak. And when I say marbling, that's going to be the fat that's inside of the meat here. And we're going to have, this here is considered like a prime cut of beef. So if you notice here, we've got this nice thick layer of fat here, but also inside here you see all of this marbling. The other 2 cuts of beef that you're going to find is going to be select beef. That's going to be your lowest grade, and then choice beef, which is kind of in the middle between the select and the prime beef. And you're not going to get that marbling in the select and the choice that you do in the prime, and it's going to change how you're going to want to prepare it. So because you don't have that marbling in there, you're going to make sure that you don't cook it to anything more than a medium rare. Anything over that is going to make it super tough, and you're just not going to enjoy that steak as much. So, for example, when I purchased this, I couldn't find anything at the grocery store that met the thickness that I wanted or the marbling, and I went to the meat department and told them exactly what I wanted. We went through like 10 or 15 different steaks, and we settled on the 2 that I'm using here today. So let's see. So now that we know how to pick out the right cut, I want to talk about the thickness a little bit. So the temperatures that we're going to be using are going to be based on 1.5 to 2 inch thick cut of meat. This here is about 1.5 inches, and honestly, I wouldn't want to go any thicker than this, just because I find that a smaller cut of ribeye is actually a tastier piece. This would probably feed me and my daughter both because it is quite thick. And again, your cooking times are going to change depending on the thickness, because you want to make sure that you're going to have this at the right temperatures, and we're going to be using a thermometer for that as well. So an inch and a half, no more than an inch and a half, no more than 2 inches on your thickness. And we're going to be cooking this to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, which is going to get us a medium rare cut. So just to recap, we want a piece of beef that has nice marbling, an inch and a half cut, or thick cut. We're going to remove it from the fridge at least an hour before you want to serve it or cook it. And what we're going to do here is I like to use paper towels because, you know, it's still raw meat, and we don't want to be, you know, having raw meat all over your kitchen. So we're just going to pat it dry real well and get all of the excess moisture off of that. And the reason why we're doing this is because moisture is going to be your enemy when cooking the steak. What's going to happen is that moisture is going to cook off of the steak, and it's going to actually steam your steak. And that's going to deter us from getting that nice brown crispy layer of on the outside of the steak that we're looking for. And this method is super simple. All we're going to use is like a coarse salt. I'm using a kosher salt here, and I'm going to apply it really thick. And it may be thicker than what you're comfortable with, but this is going to marinate it. And I know online there's different schools of thought on whether to use salt or not. Some places say don't use salt, others do. And I have been cooking this way for a while now, and I absolutely love it. We're going to actually wipe off a majority of this before we put it in the oven, so it's not like it's going to be a salty piece of meat. So let's see. And I also I tend to get this fat strip here nice and salty as well. I think that it helps with the flavor in the end. So now that you have it all salted, I'll show you how it looks, and I hopefully you can see it real nice here. And it's just, you know, pretty salty. Sometimes I'll pick up the edge and kind of pat it with the salt that fell off on there, just to make sure that I have it on all of the steak. And you literally are just going to leave it on your countertop for an hour and just let it kind of breathe. You'll notice that it's going to be wet again after an hour, and you're going to go back through here and pat dry before you're going to put it into the oven. So let's talk a little bit more about the next step and how we're going to cook it. So we're going to preheat the oven to 275 degrees. It's not a high heat at all. We're going to slowly cook this. And like I said, when you have it marinated here, you can, I usually don't do more than an hour, and I'll leave it right out on the countertop, and it won't even be, I don't even cover it most of the time unless it's summer and super hot in my kitchen. So if you're going to do for more than an hour, you're going to want to put a piece of saran wrap over it, throw it into your refrigerator. And like I said, it could stay there for up to 24 hours. Again, just don't forget to pat dry before you put it in the oven. So we're going to get the oven at 275. And what I do is I basically just take a cookie sheet or a shallow pan, and I put a rack on top of it, because again, this is all about moisture. We don't want that steak sitting in its juices while it's cooking there. And then we put it in there for 25 to 30 minutes. I would say a good rule of thumb is if you have a bone-in ribeye, you're only going to want, you'll probably want to be more at that 30-minute mark. And for this, I don't use a bone-in ribeye. I prefer the bone, you know, not to have the bone in there. But you're going to test the temperature once it's inside the oven for, like I said, 20, 25 minutes. And when it gets to 90 to 95 degrees, you know that it's time to take it out. So once you take it out of the oven, you're going to have your cast iron skillet ready to go. And when I say ready to go, I mean nice and warm, and you're going to have oil in there as well, so that when you put the steak in there, you're not putting it into a cold pan. So we're going to lay it right in that cast iron, and we will flip it around until we have the searing the way that we want it to. And I have a finished steak right here. It's a little awkward trying to film it and show you what I have here, but I'm going to pop it out of my pan. This is a ribeye steak, nice and gold texture on the front, or on the whole thing. And with the way that we prepared it, normally you're gonna cut against the grain of the steak, but for this one, it's really not gonna matter as much because we didn't shock the piece of meat the way that you normally would, and it doesn't need to sit afterwards either. I mean, it doesn't hurt to sit it for another 5 minutes, but it's not necessary in order to get this out on the table and served to your family. So what I'm going to do real quick is just cut in here, and hopefully if I did it right, we're going to have a nice medium rare steak. And as I'm cutting into it, I'm seeing we have a little bit of pink here, so it did exactly what I wanted. I wouldn't call it medium rare. I would call this more medium, which is actually how I prefer my steak. And I will show you what the inside is going to look like here. Now, I left this in for about 25 minutes, and I think for the next one that I'm going to cook, I'll probably only leave that in there for 20, just so we can have that a little more rare. And I'm hoping with the video you can see how beautiful that is. This is exactly where I like my steak to be. My daughter, she tends to like hers a little more rare. So, you know, she would like this to be in there just a little less time. So I hope that this was informational to you. I hope that you learned a little bit of something about how to cook a ribeye here in your house instead of having to go out to the restaurant to enjoy a good quality piece of meat. So just to recap a little bit, we talked about the different grades of beef and marbling and why it's so important. We talked about the thickness of the cut that we purchased. We talked about doing the salting and how we're going to keep that meat dry so that we can, again, get this beautiful crust on here that's going to really lock in the flavor, and you're going to really enjoy that piece of meat. And then we're going to put it in the oven until it reaches between 90 and 95 degrees. Put it in the cast iron skillet, brown it, and then serve to your family. I hope you guys have a great evening, and I would love to know if you try this method and what you think of it. Thanks so much.